did you say that watering hole was?
I got a job for you.
I'm not really good at jobs.
I need you to keep on the dodge and sidle up the loblolly past them hornheads, just hooting and hollering and score off them rustlers. We'll cut dirt and get the bulge on them.
What?
He just wants you to get on that rock and scream.
But who's out there?
They'll come right at you. You hold your ground. Don't move.
Don't move? What if they have claws and big teeth?
Don't overthink it.
Do you remember the first time you ever saw the first Toy Story?
Yes, I do. That's a great question. I was at CalArts. It was my first year at CalArts in Valencia, California. And John Lasseter, Pete Docter, and I think Anderson brought the film to the school. They brought it over to CalArts, and they rented some theater outside in a mall. And I remember the opening sequence, how blown away. Like, we were there to study 2D animation. I'm on the other side when, like, I understood animation to a certain point, but I only knew about 2D. And once that was the first one, obviously, when they played that, it kind of changed and blew everyone's brains out of that. It was just like, oh my God, that's going to be the way the movies are going to be made. It's incredible. No one thought that 2D would, kind of like dissipate as much as it has. But at that time, it was just like, boy, there's just a new kid in town here, this digital animation.
You went on to work on the Iron Giant, but then where did you learn to work with 3D?
I learned it at Pixar. On Iron Giant, it was still like a 2D process, obviously. I know the Giant was 3D, but I didn't have anything to do with that. And then I worked on another movie, Osmosis Jones, that was primarily 2D, and I got some experience animating on a picture in 2D, like hand-drawn stuff. But then as Brad and that gang went up to Pixar, I applied for an animator position, a 3D animation, but they saw my stuff, and I had just started like doing scenes, and so I didn't have enough work, and so they said, sorry, you're going to need more experience. And at that time, no one was really either offering like CG classes. There weren't a lot of that at that time. But luckily, I couldn't get into the animation department. Months later, Ralph Eggleston, who was the production designer of Nemo, called and said, hey, we really love your portfolio. Can you come up and help us do art? And I started in there, and then so that translation into computer was the first time doing a model packet where you're drawing scuba gear and you've got to draw it in 3 dimensions, a blueprint so that someone could build it into the computer. And so that was the first foray into that. But then everyone would talk about, because I would move from department to department, story, art, and then animation. When it got to animation, that's the most heavily computer. I mean, that's where all the work goes. They were like, don't worry about it. As long as you have some animation chops, that should be able to translate. All it really is about you learning a new tool. And it really was like that. In the beginning, it felt kind of like a video game where you would get your character and then like A is punch, punch, B is kick, kick. Meaning like there would be a character there that you would kind of move inside. Like it's almost like a virtual stop motion with these controllers, essentially keyboard. And they just kept pushing like, you'll learn through the job. That's how you learn the 3D, and that is how I learned it.
And how close was the film to being finished when you came on, or that version of the film?
Well, how close was it? I guess it was still in kind of like a mid-range place where like you could kind of steer it off, but there was all story-based changes. Like for example, like the voice cast thing, we did those casting changes pretty earlier on, only because the story required Arlo to be younger, to just get a little bit more of that like kid, that push that arc of like he's on that like the fringe of turning and maturing, and so we had an older voice before that, and so that first story change of making him sound younger kind of rippled through the rest of the movie, where all of a sudden, oh, his brothers can't be that age now, and sisters, they have to now become Arlo's age, and then Arlo needs to be more about incapability and fear. Then all of these other characters started changing throughout the world in terms of the people that he would meet and how he would be tested. And so it was all story-based when those changes happened. And that's where no matter how big the scale of the change or the problem that may have occurred, as long as I focused in on the story and what the story needed, those answers would come very easily.
So I know he loses his father in this,
yes.
Which is it's kind of a common thing in a lot
yes.
of Disney stories. Was that always part of the story?
Yes. No, it wasn't. That was a part that I brought in. I have experienced these certain feelings about mourning, loss, and death, and that was something I thought that I worked with the story guys that like keep pushing that Arlo would not only need to grow externally in his strength and his belief in himself, but internally as well, of learning how to mourn and understand that kind of loss. And so that was one of the first things that we kind of triggered in this version, was creating a hole in Arlo that needed to be filled by Spot. The funny thing is that in buddy movies, the two characters are kind of in conflict with each other, and then they start to kind of understand each other. In this scenario, the boy and dog, there's conflict only coming from one direction. The boy toward the dog. The dog is more of a catalyst, but it really is something to feel when that character, that you understand why that character has those issues, and creating that hole in Arlo's life made room for Spot to fill it, if that makes sense. And so that's how how that was kind of pushed into being.
So the environment is obviously very photorealistic.
Yeah.
But the characters have a little bit more of a traditional animation
Yeah.
look with the big eyes. Can you speak a little bit to that contrast?
Sure, absolutely. Some of our early research trips that we did, when we started talking about dinosaurs, first of all, we would find these bones kind of they were all in the Northwest, where we started like talking about the setting in Montana, Wyoming, and on these areas. And we thought that it'd be really interesting to kind of set a dinosaur there. But because this is a younger kid kind of going through the journey, not only is it a boy and dog story, it's a survival story as well. Nature would become a big antagonist in the film. A lot of dinosaur movies have like the big bad dinosaur at the end. We've been pushing for more of something even scarier than that. And nature can be both beautiful and dangerous at the same time. And so regarding the backgrounds, when we went out to go do research, we found that like the landscapes were so soul-enriching, but at the same time, when you look deeper into it, you could see scars of where landslides were. You could see where rocks were placed and trees that had fallen. And that started to kind of create a reality that like, holy cow, like if we go graphic on these trees with a graphic character like Arlo, you start to lose the threat of what that world would become. And then so in the beginning, we have a four-legged creature who is an animal, and so like, how do you put that character inside a natural world and make him feel kind of outside of it, that he doesn't belong there? And then that's part of his arc, that throughout the movie, he does get closer and then more comfortable with nature. And pretty soon he's running with Spot, throwing Spot up into the air, and that it should all kind of meld in together. We did some tricks with animation where you would see Arlo's shoulders. He's got an egg-shaped body, and it's even more pronounced when his shoulders come in, making him feel weaker, a little bit more graphic, and a little bit more like a stranger in a strange land when he first finds himself out in the wilderness. But then as the movie progresses, his shoulders kind of come out straighter, and then his neck becomes a little bit more strong, and then he starts to fit in a little bit more into the world. And so it was really that balance of trying to figure out how to make a dinosaur a young boy stuck out in the wilderness. And so we have these big eyes on him, so that when he's in the woods and he's terrified of all of that hopefully you can feel something, and so that was some of the thinking behind it. Yeah.
So we like to ask everybody, what's on your Dork Shelf?
Yeah, I have some Studio Ghibli stuff, some Miyazaki kind of things that I've gotten from Totoro and Porco Rosso. I'm a huge Quentin Blake fan as well, and so I have some little sculptures of his. And then, like as you know from the presentation this morning, I love Dumbo. I have this little like kind of bronze statue of Timothy leading Dumbo by the tail through it, and yeah, it's pretty dorky.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.